The day I buried my son, his widow threw me out of my own house. I'm Thomas Mitchell, 68 years old, and I've learned that sometimes the quietest person in the room holds all the power. They just don't feel the need to prove it until they do. It happened during the reception after David's funeral. Victoria cornered me in the kitchen while mourners filled the living room, their hushed conversations mixing with the clink of coffee cups and the rustle of sympathy cards. "Tom, we need to talk about your situation," she said, her voice low but firm. I was still in my funeral suit, the same charcoal gray I'd worn to my wife Margaret's service 2 years earlier. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my untouched coffee. My situation? Let's be realistic. She glanced toward the doorway, ensuring privacy. David was supporting you. Now that he's gone, I simply can't take on that responsibility. You understand. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward. I looked at her, this woman who'd been part of our family for 8 years, who'd lived under this roof, eaten at this table, celebrated holidays in this living room. "How long do I have?" Relief flickered across her face. 30 days should be sufficient. I've already researched several senior communities. Sunset Manor has availability. It's quite nice, really. $800 a month for a studio apartment. $800. My entire Social Security check in her estimation. "I'll be out by November 15th, I said quietly. "I appreciate you being reasonable about this, Tom." She touched my arm, a gesture that might have seemed compassionate to an observer. "I know it's difficult, but it's truly for the best. You can't maintain a house this size at your age." I nodded and returned to the mourners, leaving Victoria to her assumptions. What she didn't know, what she had never bothered to ask, was that the house she was evicting me from had been mine since March 15th, 1987. That I'd paid $43,000 cash for the lot and another $78,000 for construction. That every property tax bill for 37 years bore my name, every insurance premium, every utility payment. What she especially didn't know was that the money she thought she'd inherited, David's comfortable lifestyle, his engineering degree, even his life insurance policy, all flowed from a trust I'd established in 1985. The Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. Current balance, $853,412. For 8 years, Victoria had lived off my generosity while mistaking it for her husband's success. She'd watched David help me with groceries and doctor appointments and assumed dependence. She'd seen my 15-year-old Honda Civic and my simple clothes and concluded poverty. She'd confused humility with helplessness, quiet with weakness, generosity with desperation. She was about to learn the cost of assumptions, the erasure Victoria moved quickly to claim her imagined inheritance. Within a week of the funeral, Margaret's photographs disappeared from the mantel. The ones of our wedding day, our anniversary trips, our life together. David's childhood artwork vanished from the refrigerator. Even my old CPA certificates came down from the den wall. "I'm updating the decor," she explained when I asked. David always wanted something more modern. Fresh start, fresh start. As if 40 years of memories were clutter to be discarded. I said nothing. I'd learned long ago that silence can be more powerful than argument. Instead, I watched. I observed. And I planned. She brought colleagues through the house that first week, 3 well-dressed women in expensive boots, cataloging my home like it was a fixer-upper on the market. "The bones are incredible," said a blonde named Jessica, running her hand along the crown molding I'd installed with David when he was 12. "But everything else is so dated. Complete renovation," Victoria assured her. The kitchen especially. Those cabinets are pure 1987. They were. Margaret and I had chosen them together, spent 6 months planning that kitchen. David had helped me install them during his summer break from college. "Once Tom moves to Sunset Manor, I'll have complete creative control," Victoria continued. "Gut it all, start fresh." I sat in the corner with my newspaper apparently invisible. They spoke about me in third person, as if grief had rendered me deaf as well as destitute. My neighbor Helen visited often during those weeks, bringing casseroles and coffee and sympathy. "You're handling this with such grace," she told me. "Not everyone would be so understanding." "Understanding requires nothing from me," I replied. Just patience. What I didn't tell Helen, what I told no one, was that I'd already scheduled a meeting with Margaret Collins, my attorney of 20 years. The folders were prepared, each document meticulously organized. Property deeds, tax records, trust agreements, 37 years of paper trails proving ownership, proving support, proving everything Victoria assumed didn't exist. The meeting was scheduled for November 5th. Victoria had demanded I leave by the 15th. I would let her enjoy her assumptions for exactly 10 more days. Then she would learn what happens when certainty meets reality. On the confrontation Thursday morning, November 1st, Victoria let herself into my house with David's key. No knock, no courtesy call. She simply walked in like she owned the place, which in her mind she did. I was having breakfast when she marched into the kitchen, a manila folder tucked under her arm. "Tom, we need to finalize some details." She sat across from me without invitation, opening the folder to reveal a legal pad covered in notes. "I need to understand exactly what expenses David was covering for you. Utilities, property taxes, insurance. I need figures so I can budget properly going forward." I took a slow sip of coffee, considering my response. "What makes you think David was covering those expenses?" Her pen paused mid-stroke. Please, you're on Social Security. There's no way you could afford this house independently. Have you seen any mortgage statement? We kept our finances separate. David handled his own accounts. Tax bills, insurance premiums, David managed all of that. He told me you didn't understand finances, that he took care of everything for you. I stood and walked to the sink, rinsing my cup with deliberate care. The morning sun slanted through the window. I'd installed myself in 1987, casting long shadows across the floor. "Victoria, did David ever specifically tell you he was paying my bills?" He didn't have to tell me. It's obvious. This house is worth over $400,000. Your Social Security couldn't possibly? And how do you know what this house is worth? I'm a real estate agent, Tom. I know property values. But you've never seen the deed. The question hung between us. Victoria's confident expression flickered just for a moment, like a candle in a draft. "I don't need to see the deed. David inherited this house when Margaret died. Did he? Of course he did." Her voice rose slightly. "Who else would get it?" I dried my hand slowly, carefully. "You know, Victoria, you've made a lot of assumptions about my finances over the years." "They're not assumptions, they're logical conclusions based on observation." "Are they?" I leaned against the counter. "In 8 years of marriage, did David ever show you a mortgage statement? I told you we kept our finances separate. Did he ever mention making house payments? We didn't discuss every line item. Did you ever see him write a check for property taxes? Transfer money for utilities? Anything that would actually prove he was supporting me?" Her silence was answer enough. "Here's what I think happened," I said quietly. "David helped me after Margaret died. He bought groceries sometimes, drove me to doctor appointments, mowed the lawn. And you saw that help and assumed dependency. You saw kindness and concluded obligation." Victoria stood abruptly, her real estate composure cracking. "Fine. If you're so certain, show me the deed. Prove you own this house." "I don't need to prove anything to you." "Yes, you do. Because I'm David's widow and I inherited everything. This house, his savings, his life insurance, everything." I smiled then, small and sad. "We'll see about that, Victoria." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you might want to verify your facts before making demands, especially in front of witnesses." "What witnesses?" "The 3 colleagues you brought here Sunday. The ones who heard you call me a burden." Her face went pale. "You have until November 15th, Tom. After that, I'm changing the locks." "We'll see," I repeated. After she left, I called Margaret Collins. "It's time," I told her. "Schedule the meeting for Tuesday morning at her office in front of her colleagues." "Tom, are you certain? This will humiliate her publicly." No, I corrected gently. What she did Sunday was humiliation. This is education. There's a difference. The Sunday mistake that Sunday, Victoria made her biggest error yet. I was preparing for church when she arrived with Jessica and 2 other agents. They swept through my house like appraisers, photographing corners, discussing renovation budgets, treating 40 years of memories like a condemned building awaiting demolition. "These cabinets have to go." one woman said, wrinkling her nose at Margaret's carefully chosen oak. Complete gut job, Victoria agreed. Once Tom is settled at Sunset Manor, I'm starting fresh. New appliances, quartz countertops, open concept. I descended the stairs in my church suit. The conversation stopped. Tom, Victoria's voice was artificially bright. Perfect timing. I wanted you to meet some colleagues who'll be helping with the renovation. Renovation of what? I asked quietly. The house, of course. We were just discussing the kitchen redesign. Maybe you could tell them about the maintenance issues. The roof leak, the basement dampness. There was no roof leak. The basement had been professionally waterproofed in 2002. I'm not aware of any issues, I said carefully. Victoria's smile sharpened. Tom's very attached to this place. He sometimes doesn't see problems that are obvious to professionals. The reality is, she turned to her colleagues, including them in her explanation. Tom's been living on David's generosity for years. Since Margaret died, he's been essentially dependent on us. And now that David's gone, he's having trouble accepting that he simply can't afford to maintain a property this size. The room grew uncomfortable. Even her colleagues shifted their weight, looking anywhere but at me. Is that what you think? I asked, my voice still soft. It's what I know, Tom. David spent over $40,000 last year supporting you. Property taxes, utilities, medical expenses, groceries. And I won't continue carrying that burden. The word echoed in the sudden silence. A burden, I repeated. I'm sorry, but yes. Someone has to be honest. You've been dependent on family charity, and it's time to face reality. I looked at each woman in turn, Jessica, who'd praised my crown molding, the brunette who'd criticized my cabinets, the redhead who'd suggested open concept. They would remember this moment. They would remember what was said and who said it. You might want to verify your facts, I said quietly, before making statements like that in front of witnesses. Then I left for church. Behind me, I heard Jessica say uncertainly, Victoria, maybe you should, but I was already gone. Some conversations are better finished with lawyers present. Hashish the Reckoning Tuesday morning. November 5th, Margaret Collins and I walked into Premier Realty at exactly 10 o'clock. The office buzzed with the usual activity, agents on phones, clients reviewing listings, coffee brewing in the break room. Victoria sat at her desk with a young couple, showing them photos on her computer screen. When she saw us, her professional smile froze. Tom, what are you? We need to discuss some legal matters regarding your late husband's estate, Margaret said, her voice carrying across the office. Specifically matters of property ownership and inheritance. The young couple exchanged glances and began gathering their things. Around the office, conversations faltered. Heads turned. I'm with clients, Victoria said, her composure slipping. Can this wait? No, Margaret said simply. It cannot. By now, Jessica and the other Sunday visitors had approached, drawn by the commotion. Other agents pretended to work while clearly listening. Victoria's clients left with mumbled apologies. She stood alone behind her desk, surrounded by colleagues facing her assumptions. I don't understand, she said. We already discussed everything. You discussed it, I replied. I listened. There's a difference. Margaret opened her briefcase and removed the first folder, the one I'd pulled from my basement filing cabinet, meticulously organized over 37 years. Mrs. Mitchell, you claim you inherited the property at 447 Maple Street from your late husband, David Mitchell. Is that correct? His will left everything to me. His personal property, yes. His car, his clothing, his personal effects. Margaret pulled out a document. However, this is the deed to 447 Maple Street, purchased March 15, 1987, by Thomas Mitchell for $43,000. Construction completed June 1987 at a cost of $78,000. Total investment, $121,000, paid in full. No co-signers, no joint tenancy, no mortgage. Sole owner, Thomas Mitchell. She laid the deed on Victoria's desk. Victoria's face drained of color. She snatched the paper, scanning it desperately, looking for some error, some loophole, some explanation that fit her worldview. This can't be right, she whispered. David inherited this house when Margaret died. Margaret Mitchell owned no real property, Margaret Collins said gently. Everything was purchased by Thomas Mitchell before their marriage in 1985. But David, he paid the bills, the taxes, everything? No. Margaret laid out the second folder. Here are 37 years of property tax receipts, all paid by Thomas Mitchell from his personal accounts. Insurance policies, all in Thomas Mitchell's name. Utility bills, Thomas Mitchell. Maintenance contracts, landscaping services, repairs and improvements, all documented, all paid by Thomas Mitchell. The office had gone completely silent. Victoria's colleagues stood frozen, watching their star agent's competence crumble in real time. But David had money, Victoria said, her voice small now. He had a good job, savings, investments. David was comfortable, Margaret agreed, because Tom made him comfortable. She opened the third folder. The Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust, established June 1985. Current balance, $853,412. David was a lifetime beneficiary, receiving monthly allowances for education, housing assistance, and family support. But he was never a trustee, never an owner. The trust was and remains under Thomas Mitchell's sole control. Jessica made a small sound, surprise or sympathy I couldn't tell. Tom was supporting David, Margaret continued, not the other way around. Every dollar David had access to flowed from this trust. When you saw David helping Tom with groceries or doctor appointments, you were witnessing a son helping his elderly father, which was real. But the financial relationship ran in the opposite direction. Victoria sank into her chair, the expensive office chair in the prestigious corner office she'd earned through competence and expertise, the career she'd built on knowing property values and ownership structures, the life insurance, she said suddenly, grasping at the last straw. David's life insurance through his engineering firm. That's mine. $150,000. That belongs to me. Margaret pulled out one final document. The beneficiary designation for David Mitchell's life insurance, filed with his employer in 2016, beneficiary, the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. That money belongs to Tom. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the coffee maker gurgling in the break room, the hum of fluorescent lights, the traffic outside on Main Street. Victoria looked around the office at her colleagues, at Jessica, who'd praised my crown molding, at the broker watching from his office doorway, at the receptionist who'd stopped answering phones. She looked at the clients who'd left, the career imploding before her eyes, at the assumptions that had cost her everything. "Tom," she whispered, "I didn't know. You didn't ask. You could have told me. You should have told me. You should have told me. You should have asked respectfully. You should have verified before demanding. You should have treated me like a human being instead of an inconvenient burden." Margaret closed the folders. "Mrs. Mitchell, you have 30 days to vacate the property at 447 Maple Street. The same timeline you gave Tom. First and last month's rent plus security deposit are due immediately if you wish to negotiate a different arrangement. Market rate for a property of that size is $3,500 per month. I can't afford that. Then you have 30 days. Margaret's voice was kind but firm. "You're a capable woman with a career. I'm sure you'll figure something out." As we turned to leave, Victoria called out, "Tom, wait, please. What happens now?" I looked back at her. This woman who'd lived in my home, benefited from my generosity, and repaid it with cruelty and assumptions. "Now you learn what I've always known," I said quietly, "that quiet people aren't weak. We're just careful about when we speak. And when we do speak, the words matter." "You called me a burden in front of witnesses," I continued. "You erased my wife's memory from our home. You planned to destroy the kitchen we built together. You assumed I was helpless, hopeless, worthless. You never asked, never verified, never showed basic human respect. These aren't consequences, Victoria. This is accountability. And sometimes the most powerful lesson you can teach is simply the truth." Hashash aftermath, the story spread through Cleveland's suburban real estate community like wildfire. By Wednesday, 3 of Victoria's clients had requested different agents. By Friday, her broker had suggested she might find better opportunities elsewhere. Helen brought me coffee and updates. People are saying she can't be trusted with their biggest investment if she couldn't identify the owner of her own home. "That seems harsh," I said. "That seems fair," Helen corrected. Real estate is built on competence and attention to detail. She showed neither. Margaret Collins called with settlement offers. Victoria's attorney proposed 6 months at reduced rent. I countered with 30 days at market rate, $10,500 up front. Victoria declined. She couldn't afford it. By November 20th, she'd moved out. By December 1st, she'd left Premier Realty entirely. Fresh start in Columbus, I heard. I felt no triumph in her downfall. But I felt no guilt either. Victoria had made her choices: cruelty over kindness, assumptions over questions, humiliation over respect. The consequences were natural, not vindictive. David's friend Mike Thompson visited to apologize. We all believed her story. We should have known better. David always talked about your success, your wisdom. We just saw what we expected to see. Most people do, I said. Hush, hush, the final visit 3 weeks after the reckoning. Victoria appeared at my door with a cardboard box. I found some things, she said quietly. Photo albums from when David was little, Margaret's recipe cards, they belong to you. I invited her in. She set the box on the coffee table, the same table Margaret and I had bought at a garage sale in 1986, and looked around the unchanged living room. You haven't renovated, she observed. Why would I? We sat in the quiet. Outside, November wind scattered leaves across the lawn David and I had planted together. I owe you a real apology, Victoria said. Not the one I gave at the office. A real one. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. She met my eyes. I saw an old man in an old car with old clothes, and I assumed you were nothing. I measured your worth by appearances and found you wanting. I was cruel when I should have been grateful. I erased Margaret's memory from the home you built together. I planned to destroy everything you and David created. And I did it all with such certainty, such confidence that I knew best. She paused. David learned his values somewhere. His kindness, his quiet strength, his integrity. He learned it from you. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy judging. We all make mistakes, I said gently. The question is what we do after. I'm trying to learn. I found a job in Columbus. Fresh start. I hope it goes well. She stood to leave, then turned back. Can I ask you something? Of course. If I'd been respectful from the beginning, if I'd asked instead of assumed, would you have helped me? I considered the question carefully, honestly. Yes, I would have explained the situation privately, given you time to get established, maybe help financially during the transition. We could have honored David's memory together instead of fighting over assumptions. I'm sorry I didn't give us that chance. So am I. After she left, I opened the box. David's baby picture smiled up at me. The son Margaret and I had raised in this house, on this land, in this life we built with our own hands and hearts. I thought about the past months. The funeral, the humiliation, the reckoning, the aftermath. Victoria had learned an expensive lesson about assumptions and respect. But I'd learned something too. I'd learned that quiet strength doesn't mean silent acceptance of disrespect. That boundaries aren't walls but foundations for healthy relationships. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth and let others face the results of their choices. David would have understood. He'd learned those lessons watching Margaret and me navigate life with quiet dignity, responding to challenges with grace rather than volume, proving our worth through actions rather than declarations. Some inheritances aren't measured in dollars or deeds. The most valuable ones are measured in character and integrity, in the ability to remain yourself when the world demands you prove your value. Those can never be claimed by assumption or taken by force. They can only be earned through a lifetime of choices, and they're the only inheritance that truly matters. Victoria learned it the hard way, but she learned it, and sometimes that's the greatest gift you can give, even when it costs everything to receive it.